So okay, today the ds-incubator continues on the series about the package reprex, and this is the last meetup of the series where we're going to be talking about the package philosophy and how that philosophy is implemented in a very small set of features of that package. And then reprex does a lot more than those, three things that I'm going to be talking today, but that's the core of what why reprex is so useful. And I think that my motivation to talk about this idea is because I develop packages myself, and a lot of the time I don't start with an idea that is so clearly formulated as it is here, where the authors laid out the three elements that make up that philosophy, and then based on that philosophy is very easy, and I'm going to show that later, to implement, even at a very basic level, to implement a reprex maker once you have very clear in your mind what you actually want to achieve and why. So that's the goal of today, to cover the section package philosophy in the article reprex do's and don'ts from the reprex website. So this is what we're going to be talking today. So my version of this has a little bit of code, and so it's the same thing that you see here, except that adds a few examples. So the first, there's three things really to the package philosophy. The first thing is that the code must run for everyone, not just for the person who is creating the reprex. And in the words of the article that I'm following today, the idea is that this is done in a separate R process, not the one that the author is using to create the reprex. So you can call R from inside R, but in a separate process, so that if that process doesn't have what it needs, it should totally throw an error, so that the author knows that there is something in there that the other person on the other side of the world won't have. So if you share reprex that doesn't contain everything that it needs, then the other person will have a really hard time reproducing your error, right? So that's the very first component of reprex philosophy. The code must be self-contained, and if it is not, then you should just get an error. So what I'm showing here, actually, as Jackson said, this is something that was commented before we started the recording, that the idea that sometimes you do have some kind of data that is beyond the scope of the reprex, and then what you get is an error. So that's what's going on here, for example. So in this particular case, I'm I'm assigning the values 1 to 4 to the object y, but I'm doing that in the global environment, in my own global environment, like in R, right? But then when I actually create the reprex, that object y is not available. So what is inside the reprex is the thing that everyone else will have. So if the object is defined outside the scope of the reprex, so see how the reprex starts here, and y was defined before, then when I run min y, reprex won't see it. So what I get is this error. So this is a feature. This is lovely, because it means that you as an author immediately know that you're just missing something. And if you were able to actually run that, you would get yourself in trouble, because you would be sharing code that someone else won't be able to reproduce. You are able to reproduce it because you have access to the global environment where y has been defined, but the person reading your reprex does not have that global environment, so they don't have a y. So it is a feature that this error appears as soon as possible. So that's the very first element. So again, the philosophy is that the code must run for everyone, and the implementation of that is that you get an error. So that's the idea. At even a lower level, if you're interested in the tricks, then this is your thing. So the call R package is the package that allows you to run code from inside R, but in a separate process, and it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward, and very powerful. So it is inside reprex. So reprex call R, to deliver this feature, that, to create a totally independent process that doesn't know about anything that lives in your global environment. So it's, it starts from fresh. The second element of this philosophy is that others, anyone who is not the author of reprex, should not have to run the code. So they could choose to run it, but they should not have to run it. And what's the implementation of that? Well, in the words of the article, they use R Markdown render. So if you ever use R Markdown, then you're very close actually to having a reprex maker, and I'm going to demonstrate that in a moment. So R Markdown render allows you to create a file like that where you have code and you have output. So the same output that would go to the screen if you run the code on the console in R, then that output on the screen, boom, appears in the same document where you are writing the code. And that's great, because now the person on the other side of the reprex, they can all see not only the code, but also the output. So this could be my example here. I'm using the very simple example actually that comes with the reprex package in the README file. So the very first code that you see in the reprex README file is these two lines that I'm highlighting here. And I'm wrapping it here in the function reprex to make it obvious that that is how I'm creating that reprexes. And I'm using a particular flavor of reprex, which is reprex_r, just because it gives this output that is very well customized for the presentation I'm doing today. This is also like a way to wrap up the meetup, showing some of the more advanced features, if you will, of the reprex package. But you can create a reprex as you learned in the first meetup of the series, like with keyword shortcuts, with the addings, or with the function as I'm doing here. There's a bunch of ways, and if you want to review them, please go check the first meetup. So again, this example shows that if you run this reprex, the output that you get contains the code, this line here and this line here, but also contains the output, which means that the person reading your reprex, they don't have to run it. They already know what output they will get. If they choose so, they can run it, and we'll see that in the next item of the package philosophy, but they don't have to. That's the point here. And the third and last element of the philosophy of the package is that if they choose to run it, the others should be able to just copy and paste that code, and it should run. And that, to demonstrate how that would not be the case, let's explore this particular piece of code. So say that I run a reprex with it has this argument called comment, where I could change the default comment, which is hash and greater than symbol. So that's the default, but now I intentionally changed it to make it look exactly as the prompt that you get in R. So when I do that, I get something that is showing the output, and it's something that I could copy and paste. But the problem is that I cannot run it, because if I copy this and paste it, R will see this greater than symbol, and we'll try to do some computation with it, and that will be an error. So if I try to copy, paste, and run this code, this is what I get, what you see here. I get all this mess. I get, I was able to paste it, but then I get this error about the unexpected symbol greater than. So this is super simply the three most important elements of the package. They come backed up with a very clear philosophy. These three things that, the code must run for everyone, the others should not have to run it, and if they choose so, they should be able to just copy, paste, and run it. Those three things. So now I'm going to show you how easy it is to implement something once you have such a clear idea in your mind. And to see that, you can go to, I'm here navigating the ds-reprex repo in the folder number 3, philosophy. That's where you have the contents of today's meetup. The file you were seeing just now was, the README, and now I'm gonna go to the README, to the reprex maker file. You can see it here on in a pretty format, but I'm going to be using this from inside R, because I want to show you how I implemented a very basic version of reprex that has only these three main features. Like anything else that reprex does, my reprex maker does not do. But the most important three things it does. So what is my reprex maker? It is simply an R Markdown file. I like the output of the GitHub document flavor of all the flavors that you can get from an R Markdown file. So I chose that. So this is the basis of my reprex maker. Let me make this a little smaller because I'll need probably more space to show you a few things. So the first thing I do here, let me run this so we can read it to the right, and maybe around here should be good. So this is the document that I get. So this is a reprex maker that follows the philosophy of reprex, and it has these three main features. One, if the code is not self-contained, then you get an error. Okay, how did I implement that? I did it with this argument here that is called error equals true. And that's an argument not to reprex, it is an argument to the options that neither provides. So neither is a very tight element of R Markdown. And you can use arguments to this function, option chunk set, to control the behavior of the entire document. So my reprex maker uses error equals true, so that when something goes wrong, you do get an error on the screen. What would happen if I comment out this line, or if I say false? Okay, let's run it again. What happens is that the code just does not compile. So now my reprex maker is not very useful because it doesn't meet one of the principles of the elements of the philosophy of reprex. I do want to see that error because myself as an author also need some information about what went wrong so I can fix it. Jackson, I know that it's 20 past. I think I'm gonna go through this fairly quickly so you don't have to use brute force to kick me out. Okay, so the feature that meets the philosophy of the package is this one here. Then I'm gonna bring this back to life. Error equals true is what makes my reprex maker meet that particular item in the philosophy. Then the collapse, so I'm going to bring it back. The collapse equals true is a nicety for me. If I see, this is the output that I was showing you just before. Collapse equals true, if I comment it out and rerun my reprex maker, the only thing that changes is that now everything happens the same way, except that I get this division between pieces of chunks. So it's not all that important really. Actually, I could remove it from here to avoid confusion, but I prefer the other way. It's just I'm gonna remove it because it's not necessary to meet the goals of reprex, to meet the philosophy of reprex. So I'm gonna remove it. But what it is, an element of the philosophy is these other two items, right? So it should capture the output. Right, so my reprex maker here does capture the output because that's a feature of R Markdown anyway. So you see that, for example, the output of running this code is the error, and the output of running this code, now that it has been defined, is actually numbers 1 to 4, right? So and the output of min y is 2.5, right? So R Markdown already gives me that feature, so it comes with how R Markdown works. And finally, the third element of the reprex philosophy is that it allows you to copy, paste, and run the code. So to implement that, I used the comment hash pound and greater than. So notice that if I remove the comment, then I can still run it, and we are in the same situation that we were before. We can still run it. We still see the output, but if I wanted to copy this and paste it in the console here, I would get again an error, right? So if I try to run this, I get an error because that greater than doesn't just work. So to implement that third element of the philosophy, I add here the comment, I rerun my reprex maker, and now I have here something that I can copy and paste. So these lines here, right? I go here to the console. Let's clear this up with Control and L. I paste it, and now it runs. So the others can see the code and they can run the code. So that's it. I have here a reprex maker. So if reprex doesn't work for you, you know now how to re-implement it with the 3 core features that reflects directly the most important elements of the package philosophy. Okay, we have 7 minutes to the half hour, and I have time after that if people want to hang out a little more. So go ahead and make your questions, comments, or whatever you want to share. This is the end of the series.